In the summer of 1872, the people of a small Missouri town nestled in the Ozark Mountains whispered about twin sisters, Abigail and Amelia Harper, in hushed, uneasy tones. These pale, identical 10-year-old girls shared a private language that no one else could understand. A rapid, sing-song whispering that sounded like no known tongue. At first, their secret speech was thought to be an innocent quirk of two inseparable sisters. But when the twins began to mutter strange phrases that seemed to predict the next funeral in town, what had been a curiosity took on a far more sinister cast. What modern science might recognize as cryptophasia, a secret twin language, was to the people of 1872 either a mysterious gift from the Almighty or the devil's own tongue. And as Abigail and Amelia's eerie utterances started coming true with chilling accuracy, the community's curiosity turned to terror. By the end of that year, 5 people would be dead under inexplicable circumstances. A family would flee in the dead of night, and the Harper twins themselves would vanish without a trace, leaving behind nothing but a single tattered ribbon and a legacy of unanswered questions about the language of death that only they could speak. Before we continue with the chilling story of Abigail and Amelia Harper and the dark secrets hidden in their private language, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. We bring you the most haunting historical mysteries every week, and let us know in the comments what state or city you're listening from. These eerie stories happened in communities just like yours, often closer to home than you might think. Our story begins a decade earlier, on a stormy night in the spring of 1862. The Civil War raged in distant parts of Missouri, but in the tiny Ozark settlement of Blue Hollow, the streets were deserted and silent under the pounding rain. It was on such a night that Reverend Samuel Harper, the town's young minister, opened the heavy oak doors of the First Church of Blue Hollow after hearing a faint cry on the steps. There, in the flickering glow of his lantern, he found 2 newborn infant girls swaddled together in a drenched wool blanket. The only sign of their origins was a delicate white ribbon that had been tied around both babies' wrists, linking them together. The infants were impossibly small and deathly pale, but alive, gazing up at the Reverend with identical bright blue eyes. With no clue as to who their mother was or why they had been left at the church in the midst of a downpour, Reverend Harper took the twins into his home. His wife, Prudence, who had endured years of childlessness, saw the baby's arrival as a miracle. They named the girls Abigail and Amelia and raised them as their own daughters, not realizing that this act of compassion was the first step in a chain of events that would haunt their community for years to come. Abigail and Amelia survived their perilous start to life, but they remained slight and delicate children. As toddlers, they were unnaturally quiet. They rarely cried or babbled in the way most babies did. Instead, the twins seemed to communicate silently with each other through gestures and glances that only they could interpret. By the time they were 3 years old, the girls had begun to speak, but not in English. To Reverend Harper's astonishment, the twins appeared to have invented their own language. It was a soft, quick chatter of whispers and coos, punctuated by lilting tones, that the girls shared exclusively with one another. They spoke it when playing alone in the yard, while drawing pictures with charcoal on scrap paper, and even in their sleep, one would sometimes murmur a string of unknown words, only for the other to stir and respond in kind. At first, Samuel and Prudence Harper were amused and curious about the strange, private speech of their adopted daughters. Prudence would watch the girls from the kitchen doorway as they played some secret game under the old oak tree, their dolls arranged in a circle, the twins whispering to each other and then erupting into identical fits of giggles, as if one had told the other a delightful joke that no one else could hear. The townsfolk of Blue Hollow also took note of the Harper twins' unusual bond. In a village of barely 500 souls, everyone knew everyone's business, and the miraculous discovery of the orphaned babies on the church steps had long been a topic of conversation. As the girls grew, local women would smile kindly at them during Sunday service, charmed by the sight of the identical little ones in their matching blue dresses and white ribboned hair. It was endearing, many thought, how close the sisters were, so close that they seemed to live in a world all their own. But not everyone in Blue Hollow viewed the twins' secret language as a mere childhood fancy. Old Miss Hazel Green, a midwife who had delivered half the town's children, was the first to mutter that something about the Harper girls was not natural. Miss Hazel claimed that twins who spoke only to each other could attract spirits, citing a folk tale her grandmother had told of mirror children who shared one soul between them. Others dismissed such talk as superstitious nonsense. After all, the Harpers were God-fearing folk, raising the girls in the church's embrace. Reverend Harper himself preached that Abigail and Amelia's unique bond was a blessing from God, a sign of how precious sisterhood could be. If the Almighty saw fit to give them a language of their own, who were they to question it? For several years, life in Blue Hollow continued peacefully. The twins, though shy and prone to murmuring to one another in their invented tongue, seemed harmless enough. They attended the small schoolhouse on the edge of town starting in 1868, and although they were intelligent, learning their letters and sums quickly, they rarely spoke a word of English in class. When called upon, Abigail or Amelia would simply stare with those wide blue eyes and offer a faint smile. On the playground, other children eventually stopped trying to include them in games, unsettled by the way the sisters would stand off to the side, whispering soundlessly lip to ear, or even seeming to communicate with just a glance. They became known around town as the Silent Twins, though in truth they were only silent towards outsiders. Amongst themselves, they chattered constantly in their soft, secret language, oblivious to the stares and whispers that followed them. It was in the autumn of 1870 that the first incident occurred, which began to change the town's perception of the Harper twins. By then, the girls were 8 years old. One October Sunday, the congregation of First Church lingered in the churchyard after services, exchanging pleasantries under a crisp blue sky. Abigail and Amelia were usually kept close to Reverend Harper during these gatherings, since the girls had a habit of wandering off together if not watched. On this day, however, they slipped away from Prudence's side and made their way over to the stone steps at the front of the church, the very steps where they had been found as infants. There, the twins sat side by side, watching the townspeople mingle. Mrs. Janine Wilcox, the blacksmith's wife, noticed them and recalled later that the girls were holding hands and humming in unison. A few people smiled at the sight. Others, like Miss Hazel Green, kept their distance, eyeing the children warily. As the blacksmith, Thomas Wilcox, walked out of the church shaking hands with the Reverend, Abigail and Amelia abruptly stopped humming. According to Mrs. Wilcox, the twins turned their heads in perfect sync to watch her husband approach. Then, in that strange, lilting voice that was theirs alone, both girls spoke a short phrase together, 3 or 4 syllables of gibberish that meant nothing to the adults present. Yet the tone was sing-song and oddly cheerful. Thomas Wilcox paused, momentarily thrown off by the 2 young girls looking up at him with eerily matching expressions. "What was that, lassies?" he chuckled, not understanding their murmured words. The twins simply giggled and stood up, skipping away toward their mother Prudence, their white ribbons bouncing in their dark hair. No one thought much of this odd little exchange until later that evening, when tragedy struck. Thomas Wilcox never returned home from the workshop that night. Concerned, Mrs. Wilcox sent their eldest son to check on him. The boy found his father lying face down on the forge floor, the victim of a massive stroke. The death of a relatively young and hearty man like the 42-year-old blacksmith was a shock to everyone. The next day, as neighbors gathered in the Wilcox home to pay respects, a shaken Janine Wilcox recalled the strange scene outside the church just hours before her husband's sudden death. "Those girls, they sang at him," she whispered to a friend, her eyes wide and hands trembling. Right as he passed by, Abby and Amelia sang some nonsense and laughed. And then by nightfall, oh God have mercy, he was gone. The gossip spread through Blue Hollow like wildfire. Had the twins somehow known Thomas Wilcox was going to die? It seemed absurd. They were only children, and no one had understood the words they'd spoken. The doctor, Elias Morton, certified that Mr. Wilcox's death was due to natural causes, likely a hidden weakness in the blood vessels of his brain. But in the minds of the townsfolk, a darker narrative began to take shape. Miss Hazel Green was quick to fan the flames. She recalled how, at the very moment the twins had uttered their little rhyme, she'd felt a chill run up her spine, despite the warm sun. Others, too, started to reinterpret that innocent scene in a new light. One of the church deacons swore he had heard the girls giggle as Thomas tipped his hat to them. Was that laughter at play, or the glee of a secret well kept? Within a week, many in Blue Hollow were convinced that Abigail and Amelia's secret language harbored some knowledge of, or influence over, death itself. Reverend Harper dismissed such talk whenever he heard it. From the pulpit the following Sunday, he gently reminded his flock that God alone held our fate, and that it was sinful to suggest 2 little girls had any hand in a man's death. Publicly, most of the congregation nodded in agreement, but in private corners of the town, the tavern, the dry goods store, the family supper tables, uneasy whispers continued. Meanwhile, the Harper twins remained blissfully unaware of the suspicions swirling around them. At Thomas Wilcox's funeral, they stood beside their mother, Prudence, near the back of the gathering, holding hands and watching solemnly as the coffin was lowered into the grave. They did not speak or make a sound, yet a few people present noted that Abigail and Amelia seemed oddly calm, even expectant, during the burial, as if the proceedings of death were somehow familiar to them. Over the next few months, Blue Hollow mercifully saw no further untimely deaths. Winter came and went without incident. By the spring of 1871, some of the gossip had died down, as Thomas Wilcox's passing came to be seen as a tragic coincidence rather than a premonition come to life. The twins continued to keep to themselves, playing in the churchyard or in their bedroom, whispering to one another as always. Prudence Harper tried to encourage them to speak more English, worried that their quirk was isolating them, but the effort was largely in vain. The girls would only fall silent and stare when pressed to speak in front of others. It seemed their secret babbling was reserved solely for each other, a private world no one else could penetrate. Then, in the summer of 1871, came the incident of the miller's boy, which would propel the Harper twins from oddities to pariahs in the eyes of many. It began innocently enough, with a game of hide-and-seek. The town's children often played together in the afternoons along the main road and surrounding fields. On this day, Abigail and Amelia were actually participating, a rare occurrence, after one bold little girl invited them to join. The twins were assigned the role of seekers, while the other children hid. As the giggling children scattered, the Harper girls stood very still in the dusty road, listening. They did not count aloud or cover their eyes, as was customary. Instead, they tilted their heads, as if attuned to some far-off sound. Then, without a word, the sisters walked directly to a large rain barrel beside the old grist mill. Hand in hand, they circled it twice. By now, a few hidden children peeked out, curious. According to their later accounts, the twins were whispering rapidly to each other in their strange language as they pressed their small ears to the side of the barrel. Suddenly, Abigail spoke a single English word, one of the few anyone had ever heard either girl utter to an outsider. In a clear, small voice, she said, "Drown." A tense silence fell. One of the older boys, 11-year-old Matthew Clark, emerged from his hiding spot behind a woodpile and approached the girls, perplexed. "Did you say something, Abby?" he asked. Amelia simply pointed at the barrel. Several children, Matthew included, carefully stepped forward and looked inside. To their horror, they found 6-year-old Timothy Miller submerged and unconscious in the water. The little boy had fallen in while hiding and had silently drowned while the game was underway. Screams rang out. Adults came running. Matthew Clark pulled Timothy's limp body out while another child ran for Dr. Morton. In the chaotic moments that followed, no one paid much attention to the Harper twins. Prudence Harper arrived and whisked her daughters away from the scene, shielding their eyes and murmuring prayers. But later, those who had been present would remember with a shudder what had occurred just before Timothy's lifeless form was discovered. Abigail had spoken the word, "drown," only seconds before anyone knew something was wrong. If not for the twins' strange behavior around the barrel, the Miller boy's body might have gone undiscovered for hours. On one hand, the twins' action had inadvertently led to the recovery of the child, albeit too late to save him. Yet instead of gratitude, the town felt growing dread. How had they known? Did they cause poor Timothy to fall into the barrel somehow, perhaps by scaring him during the game? Or did their secret language give them knowledge beyond ordinary understanding? In the days after young Timothy's drowning, suspicion and fear coiled tightly around the Harper twins. The Millers, stricken with grief at the loss of their only son, could barely stand to look at Abigail and Amelia when the girls shyly attempted to pay their respects. "Get those uncanny children away from us," Timothy's mother hissed, eyes red with tears and anger. They knew he was in that barrel. How could they know? Reverend Harper tried to explain that perhaps the girls had heard a splash or seen movement, that their senses might have picked up something others missed. But even he, devoted father as he was to the twins, had no convincing answer for why Abigail would speak that one chilling word, drown, just moments before Timothy Miller's drowned body was found. In the privacy of their home, Samuel and Prudence questioned their daughters gently. Why had they gone to the barrel? Had they seen Timmy fall? The twins merely looked at each other, then at their parents, with identical blank expressions. In their shared language, they whispered a few quick sentences, sounding to Samuel's ears like a reassurance or an explanation. But of course, he understood none of it. "Please, speak so we can understand, my loves," Prudence pleaded, holding each girl by the hand. Abigail and Amelia only lowered their eyes. It seemed they either could not or would not reveal what went on in those mysterious minds of theirs. By now, Blue Hollow's attitude toward the Harper twins had shifted from cautious curiosity to open fear. Children were forbidden by their parents from playing with or even speaking to the sisters. Some went so far as to claim that even looking into the twins' eyes could bring bad luck or worse. The girls themselves reacted to this hostility in the only way they knew how, by turning even more deeply into each other. They still attended church and school, but always together, always holding hands and murmuring under their breath. If they noticed that the pew bench around them was now conspicuously empty, as neighbors chose seats far away, or that at recess the other children formed a circle on the opposite side of the yard to avoid them, neither twin showed any outward sign of hurt. Their world was each other, and as long as they had that, the rejection of the town seemed to matter little. That, of course, only fueled further speculation. "They ain't human, those two," one farmer was overheard telling Dr. Morton in the post office. "Never seen 'em cry, never seen 'em bleed even. Does the devil even let his children feel hurt like regular folk?" The doctor bristled and told the man he was speaking nonsense, but privately Dr. Elias Morton had begun to wonder if there was a natural explanation for the girls' uncanny behaviors. He had heard of rare cases where twins invent their own idioglossia, an idiopathic language, especially when isolated from other children. Perhaps Abigail and Amelia had simply developed a heightened sensitivity to their environment and an ability to communicate it between them without the need for normal speech. It was an intriguing hypothesis, and one he intended to explore further. But before Dr. Morton could arrange a formal examination of the twins, another incident rocked Blue Hollow, one that would take the community's fear to a fever pitch. It happened in November of 1871, during the wedding of a young couple at First Church. The whole town turned out for the joyous occasion. It was not often that Blue Hollow celebrated something as happy as a wedding, especially after such a sorrowful year. The pews were packed that Saturday, with Reverend Harper standing at the altar to perform the ceremony for Charlie Simmons and Eliza Walton, both beloved members of well-known local families. Abigail and Amelia had been brought along by Prudence, who insisted that this was a chance for the girls to see a normal, cheerful event for once. The twins sat with their mother near the front, dressed in their best white Sunday dresses with matching white ribbons in their braided hair, as the bride came down the aisle. According to several witnesses, the twins appeared fascinated by the spectacle of the bride in her veil and the ring of orange blossoms in her hair. All seemed to be going well until the vows began. As Charlie and Eliza stood before the Reverend, reciting their heartfelt promises to love and cherish, A sudden movement caught Prudence Harper's eye. Her daughters, seated to her left, had simultaneously tilted their heads, first to the right, then to the left, as if listening to something. Prudence later said an inexplicable dread filled her in that moment, though she could not say why. The twins exchanged a series of rapid whispers in their secret tongue, and Amelia grasped Abigail's hand tightly, her knuckles white. Neither girl was looking at the bride or groom anymore. Instead, their eyes were fixed on the high-arched doorway at the back of the church. It was then that Abigail began to laugh. Softly at first, a barely audible giggle that only Prudence heard. But within seconds, it grew to a high, chilling peal of laughter that echoed through the sanctuary. The congregation fell into an uneasy silence. Many had already been furtively watching the twins whenever they appeared in public, and now all eyes turned to the pew where the Harper family sat. Prudence was mortified and confused. It was completely out of character for her shy, well-behaved girls to disrupt a service, let alone a wedding. She gently tried to hush Abigail, but now Amelia, too, began to giggle, her shoulders shaking as if she'd heard the most hilarious joke. Up at the altar, Reverend Harper faltered in his recitation, his face flush with embarrassment and anger. "Girls," he said in a stern whisper, "this is not the time." But the twins seemed beyond hearing him. They were looking toward the doorway and laughing uncontrollably. And then, just as abruptly as it started, the laughter stopped. Abigail and Amelia fell silent, though the eerie smiles remained plastered on their identical faces. For an instant, nobody moved or spoke. Charlie Simmons cleared his throat, casting a disapproving frown toward the pew where the girls sat, and Reverend Harper managed to regain his composure to continue. But that was when the double doors at the back of the church suddenly blew open with a resounding crash. A gust of cold November wind whooshed into the chapel, snuffing out several candles along the walls and sending a chill through the startled guests. Standing in the open doorway was Charlie's elderly great-uncle, Albert Simmons, who had arrived late and in dramatic fashion, clearly, by throwing open the doors too forcefully. A few people gave nervous laughs of relief, and the ceremony resumed. Uncle Albert sheepishly closed the doors and slipped into the nearest pew. Nothing further disrupted the wedding, and by the time the couple shared their first kiss to applause, Abigail and Amelia sat quietly once more, their outburst seemingly forgotten. Yet those who had witnessed the twins laughing would not forget how it had preceded the sudden gust and the bang of the doors. In a superstitious town, that combination of events took on a life of its own in retellings. By the time the wedding guests gathered at the Simmons barn for the reception, rumors were swirling that the Harper twins had known something was about to happen, that perhaps they had even summoned the wind itself as a prank. Others shivered and wondered if the girls had been laughing at some spectral figure that only they could see entering the church. The newlyweds left for their brief honeymoon the next morning, and life in Blue Hollow tried to return to normal. But what happened during that wedding would soon turn far more sinister. Within a week, letters arrived from Charlie and Eliza Simmons, who had gone to spend their honeymoon in St. Louis. The letters carried devastating news. Uncle Albert, the very man who had arrived late to the wedding, had been found dead in his bed only 2 days after returning home. He was discovered clutching his chest, having succumbed to a heart attack in the middle of the night. While the death of an old man might normally not raise eyebrows, the timing was impossible for the townsfolk to ignore. Many of the wedding guests had seen the twins' bizarre laughter right before Albert's dramatic entrance. Now those events were being linked in whispered conversations across Blue Hollow. It was said that the girls had laughed at death itself entering the church to claim Albert Simmons. Reverend Harper was furious at this gossip, but his frustration could not quash the spread of the story. Uncle Albert's funeral was held on a cold December afternoon, and though the Harper family attended, Prudence kept the twins close at her side and glared defiantly at anyone who stared at them. The service was tense and somber. People openly flinched if Abigail or Amelia so much as cleared their throat. Every time the church's old floorboards creaked under the girls' feet, a ripple of hushed murmur swept through the mourners. After the burial, one of the Simmons cousins, deep in drink and grief, confronted Reverend Harper. "It should have been a happy day," the man slurred, eyes flashing angrily towards the twins, who stood a few paces behind their father. "Your girls ruined that wedding with their devilish laughing. Brought something dark into our midst, I say. If your own kin can't teach 'em to behave, maybe the rest of us ought to." Samuel Harper had to restrain himself from striking the man. Instead, he ushered his family away, but not before he caught sight of others nodding in agreement with the drunkard's harsh words. It was at this point that the Reverend finally began to feel true fear for his daughters. Not fear of them, as the townsfolk felt, but fear for their safety. The undercurrent of hostility was growing stronger, and he realized that if one more terrible coincidence were attributed to the twins, the people of Blue Hollow might turn their suspicions into violence. Sadly, his realization came too late to prevent exactly that. Deep in the cold January of 1872, Blue Hollow was dealt another blow. Eleanor Pritchard, the grocer's wife, took ill suddenly one evening after supper. By midnight, she was feverish and vomiting blood. Her panicked husband ran for Dr. Morton, who arrived to find Eleanor writhing in agony, her skin flushed and eyes glassy. It appeared to be a severe case of arsenic poisoning, though from where she could have gotten the poison was a mystery. The Pritchards had nearly lost a child to tainted well water the year before, so some suspected contaminated water again. Others wondered darkly if Eleanor had been deliberately poisoned by a jealous acquaintance, or even her own husband. Ugly accusations that reflected how mistrustful the town had become. Despite Dr. Morton's frantic efforts, Eleanor Pritchard died before dawn. The next morning, a strange discovery was made that sent the town into an uproar. On the front stoop of the Pritchards' grocery store, which was attached to their home, someone had placed a single white ribbon, tied in a neat bow. It was eerily similar to the ribbons often seen in the Harper twins' hair, or even to the very ribbon said to have been found on the girls when they were infants. Mr. Pritchard found it soaked with frost and dew when he stepped outside to fetch a pail of water, hours before his wife's death was widely known in town. He was baffled. What did it mean? Who would tie a ribbon on their doorstep in the dead of night? The answer, in many minds, was obvious. Abigail and Amelia. By now, any unexplained omen or event seemed to circle back to them. Some neighbors claimed they had seen two small figures out on the dark streets after midnight, flitting from shadow to shadow, though no one could say for sure. Others swore they recognized that exact ribbon. One of the twins had worn it to church just the week prior. When confronted, Prudence Harper realized one of the white hair ribbons was indeed missing from the girls' collection. Amelia's, it seemed, could not be found. Under pressure, in front of the aggrieved Mr. Pritchard and a gathering crowd, Prudence turned to her daughter sharply. "What did you do?" she demanded, voice filled with equal parts anger and fear. "Girls, did you go out last night? Why was your ribbon at the Pritchards' door?" Abigail and Amelia did not answer. They stood side by side in the open doorway of the parsonage, identical faces pale and eyes wide at the sudden confrontation. Amelia's dark braid, indeed, lacked its usual ribbon. In her right hand, she held a small rag doll, one she and her sister often carried around. Without a word, Amelia offered the doll to her mother. Confused and exasperated, Prudence took the doll, only to find that a scrap of paper had been sewn clumsily to its cloth chest. On the paper, in a childish scrawl, was a single word: Eleanor. A shocked hush fell over those assembled. Prudence felt the blood drain from her face. She realized that this doll was one of several the twins kept. They had been a gift from parishioners years ago. The twins often pretended the dolls were members of the community, assigning them names and acting out scenes. But why had they fixed Eleanor Pritchard's name to this one, on this of all days? Mr. Pritchard's sorrow quickly ignited into rage. He lunged forward as if to grab one of the girls, his face contorted. "They knew!" he shouted, voice cracking. "They knew Ellie was going to die. You little monsters! What did you do to her? Was it you who slipped poison into her food? Was it?" The crowd, now numbering a dozen townsfolk, pressed in closer to the Harpers' porch, their expressions a mix of confusion, horror, and anger. Reverend Harper stepped protectively in front of his children, hands raised. "Everyone, please," he implored. "They are just children. They had nothing to do with Eleanor's death. Amelia, why do you have Mrs. Pritchard's name on your doll? Tell us." He turned to his daughters, desperate for them to break their silence in this crucial moment. For the first time in many months, one of the twins addressed her father in English. Abigail's voice came out soft and oddly flat. "We heard a warning." The crowd quieted to hear, surprised that the girl had spoken at all. Prudence knelt down to her daughter's eye level, her heart pounding. "What warning, Abby? From whom?" Abigail's eyes flickered to Amelia, as if seeking permission. Amelia gave the slightest nod, clutching her twin's hand tightly. Then Abigail spoke again, haltingly. "We heard it. In the dark, it said Eleanor. So we made the doll so we could remember." The little girl's face crumpled, as though she were frustrated by her inability to explain properly in English. Amelia added in a whisper, "To remember. To pray." The explanation made little sense to most of the onlookers, and did nothing to soothe Mr. Pritchard's temper. Dr. Morton, who had arrived mid-commotion, stepped forward and put a hand on the widower's shoulder. "John, please. The girls may have strange ways, but they cared for Eleanor in their own fashion. This doesn't prove they harmed her." Quietly, he added, "If anything, it suggests they somehow anticipated her fate. Perhaps they overheard her complain of symptoms at church, or—" He trailed off, not knowing how to finish the thought. The truth was that Eleanor Pritchard had been perfectly well at church the day before. How could the twins have known she would be on death's door that night? Yet here was evidence that something had alerted them. That night, Dr. Morton visited the Harpers' home under the pretense of checking on Prudence, who had nearly fainted from the stress of the day's events. In reality, the doctor wanted to observe the twins up close. He found Abigail and Amelia sitting quietly at the kitchen table, each cradling one half of the white ribbon that had been returned by the Pritchards. Samuel Harper allowed the doctor to attempt a gentle conversation with the girls. "Abby, Amelia," Dr. Morton began kindly, "can you help me understand how you knew Mrs. Pritchard was in danger?" The sisters turned their large blue eyes on him but said nothing. Encouraged, the doctor continued, "I know you two have your own special way of talking to each other. Did you maybe hear something that others didn't? Perhaps you saw Mrs. Pritchard in town and noticed she looked unwell." For a long moment, the twins were silent. Just when Dr. Morton thought he would get no response, Amelia's lips parted. In their soft, secret language, she spoke a flowing sentence of delicate syllables. Abigail nodded in agreement and replied in the same tongue. They went back and forth like this for nearly a minute, conversing in front of the doctor as if he weren't there. The sound was almost musical, yet no single word was intelligible. Dr. Morton felt a chill creep into his bones as he realized the girls were discussing him. He caught the repeated mention of a word that sounded like "doctor" and saw them glance at him with what might have been amusement or pity. Though he couldn't comprehend their meaning, he had the unnerving sense that these two 10-year-olds were dissecting his very question, or perhaps his motives, and finding them either obvious or irrelevant. When Amelia and Abigail fell silent again, Dr. Morton gently pressed, "Please, speak to me in English if you can. I only want to help." Amelia tilted her head and said quietly, "No help." "Because no stop." Dr. Morton's brow furrowed. "No stop? What won't stop, my dear?" But Amelia had already reverted to silence. The twins slid off their chairs in unison and padded out of the kitchen, leaving the doctor alone with the deeply unsettled Reverend and Prudence. "Samuel," Dr. Morton said under his breath, "we must consider that perhaps the girls truly believe they are hearing or seeing these warnings. Whether it's some kind of shared delusion or a perception beyond our understanding, I cannot say. But the town is reaching a breaking point. I fear for what might happen if something isn't done to ease their fears." Samuel Harper, slumped at the table with his head in his hands, nodded wordlessly. He understood all too well. Blue Hollow was a tinderbox of superstition right now, and his daughters had become the spark. The breaking point came just 2 weeks later, in February of 1872. The winter had been bitterly cold. A heavy snow blanketed the Ozark Hills, forcing most to stay indoors except for essential errands. Early one frigid morning before sunrise, the church bell of First Church of Blue Hollow began to ring. The sound shattered the pre-dawn silence, alarming townsfolk who assumed it must signal a fire or other emergency. People hurried from their beds and out into the icy streets, pulling coats over nightclothes. They converged on the churchyard only to find a single figure standing in the snow. It was Abigail Harper, alone, tugging methodically on the bell rope with all her slender might. Reverend Harper, woken by the bell, arrived moments later, out of breath and bewildered to find one of his daughters causing the commotion. "Abby! What on earth?" he exclaimed, gently pulling her away from the rope. Abigail's hands were like ice, and her thin nightgown offered little protection from the cold. But she looked up at her father with a calm, almost trance-like expression. "Fire," she whispered. Sure enough, as the gathered neighbors began to murmur in confusion, a glow became visible on the eastern horizon, the orange flicker of flames against the dark sky. The Bradleys' barn at the far end of town was ablaze. A cry went up, and men and women alike took off running or hitched horses to sledges, racing to help the Bradley family save their farm. Samuel scooped Abigail into his arms and rushed her home, where Prudence and Amelia were already standing on the porch. Amelia was crying, the first time Samuel had ever seen tears in either of his daughter's eyes. She tried to warn them, Prudence said in a shaking voice, wrapping Abigail in blankets. She woke and said there would be a fire. We didn't understand. She ran out before I could stop her. Amelia threw her arms around her twin and sobbed quietly, while Abigail sat motionless, staring into the distance as if still in a dream. The Bradleys' barn burned to the ground, but thankfully, the bucket brigade managed to keep the flames from spreading to their house or to neighboring farms. The townsfolk praised the quick action of those who had seen the fire early, namely, those awoken by the inexplicable ringing of the church bell. When it came out that Abigail Harper had been the one to sound the alarm, reactions were mixed. Some lauded her for waking everyone and potentially saving the Bradleys' livelihood, but others found the circumstances deeply disturbing. How did the child know there was a fire before any alarm was raised? The Bradleys themselves admitted they hadn't realized the barn was burning until they heard the commotion outside. It was as if Abigail had sensed the flames the instant they started, or perhaps even before. By now, a faction of the town had reached a grim conclusion. The twins were not merely predicting these tragedies, they were somehow causing them. Miss Hazel Green was among the loudest voices spreading this notion. "Mark my words," she told her neighbor, as they watched the embers of the barn fire glow in the twilight. "Those girls are in league with dark forces. One twin rings the bell to gather us, so the other can set the fire unseen. They want us to witness their terrible works." It was utter nonsense, of course. Amelia had been home with Prudence the entire time Abigail rang the bell, and both girls were heartbroken that the Bradleys' animals, 2 horses and a cow, perished in the blaze. But fear made people twist facts to fit their narratives. The more the Harpers tried to defend their daughters, the less the people of Blue Hollow seemed to listen. Fed up with the mounting threats and whispers, Reverend Harper decided to take a bold step. He arranged for an itinerant preacher named Brother Matthias to come to Blue Hollow in March of 1872 to conduct a special prayer meeting and, unofficially, to perform a kind of spiritual intervention for Abigail and Amelia. Brother Matthias was known in the region for his fiery sermons against witchcraft and evil omens, but also for his claimed ability to heal the afflicted. Samuel Harper was loath to think of his daughters as afflicted by anything supernatural. He still believed there must be a rational explanation, but he was desperate to calm his congregation and perhaps ease the twins' burden, if indeed some dark influence plagued them. The prayer meeting was held on a Friday evening. The church was packed, not only with townspeople, but also curious folk from nearby hamlets who had heard rumors of the twins who spoke a language of death. Abigail and Amelia sat in the front pew flanked by their parents. They seemed oddly placid, given the sea of eyes on them. Some noted that the girls occasionally whispered to each other during the prayers, despite Prudence's gentle attempts to shush them. After an hour of hymns and impassioned preaching, Brother Matthias called the twins to the altar. "These innocent children have been touched by something beyond our understanding," he intoned, placing heavy hands on their small shoulders. "Whether it be a gift or a curse. We shall ask the Lord to purify their tongues and minds, to chase away any darkness that may have taken root in them. The twins stood quietly as the preacher began to pray over them loudly, calling on heavenly fire to cast out any unclean spirits. The church was silent except for Brother Matthias's deep voice and the occasional sob from a fervent congregant. Many watched intently, half expecting to see the girls convulse or scream, some tangible sign of expulsion of evil. But Abigail and Amelia did nothing of the sort. They remained still as statues, heads bowed. Only their eyes were unsettling. Both girls had fixed their gaze on the large wooden cross that hung above the altar, and despite the solemn moment, a faint smile seemed to curve their lips. Suddenly, Abigail spoke. Her voice rang out in the hush, startling Brother Matthias into silence. She was speaking in that strange, rolling language, the secret tongue. The words came out softly at first, then gaining strength and urgency. Amelia joined in, and together the twins recited something like a chant or rhyme. No one could understand a syllable, yet a cold dread swept through all who listened. It sounded as though impossible, that two voices were speaking through the girls at once, their own childish voices intertwined with another tone, something lower and resonant that resonated off the rafters. The effect was profoundly unnerving. "Stop this!" Brother Matthias barked, shaken. He gripped the twins by their shoulders, perhaps more harshly than he intended. "In the name of God, I command you, stop!" Abigail and Amelia fell silent, the echoes of their eerie chant fading. The congregation looked on with wide eyes. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire building was holding its breath. Brother Matthias, breathing hard, regained his composure and continued the prayer. But the spell of fear had already wrapped around the crowd. Later, many would claim that as the twins spoke in unison, they felt an inexplicable pressure in their chests, as if the air itself had grown heavy with doom. The night ended without any dramatic purge or revelation. Brother Matthias left town shortly thereafter, perturbed and muttering that some things were beyond even his calling. If the so-called deliverance prayer was meant to reassure Blue Hollow, it failed. If anything, the bizarre chanting by the twins convinced even more people that Abigail and Amelia were conduits for dark forces, or at the very least, that their predictions of death were not going to stop. And indeed, they did not. Spring of 1872 saw Blue Hollow teetering on the edge of open hysteria. Everyone was waiting for the next disaster, watching the Harper twins like hawks whenever they dared venture out in public. Under this intense scrutiny, Samuel and Prudence kept the girls at home more and more. Dr. Morton continued to visit, concerned for the twins' mental and physical well-being, as both girls had grown pale and thin, eating little, and plagued by nightmares. They would wake in the night babbling to each other in terror, clinging to that old white ribbon as if it were a talisman. Prudence often found them at the foot of their bed in the mornings, sitting upright and holding hands, as though they had kept vigil through the night against some unseen threat. The final straw came in late April, with a revelation that turned neighbor against neighbor and sealed the twins' fate in Blue Hollow. It began with Amelia falling gravely ill. She woke one morning with a high fever and a rash spreading across her body, symptoms Dr. Morton feared might be scarlet fever or a similar infection. Abigail refused to leave her twin's side, cooling Amelia's forehead with a damp cloth and whispering to her constantly. Reverend and Mrs. Harper were distraught, praying over the sick girl day and night. Then, on the third day of Amelia's illness, something strange happened. She began to talk in her fevered delirium, not in the secret twin language, but in clear, desperate English. Prudence Harper, dozing by Amelia's bedside, awoke to the sound of her daughter's voice, something she hadn't heard so plainly in years. At first, Prudence felt a surge of hope that the fever had broken, and Amelia was lucid. But the words coming from the child's mouth were jarring. "No, not the river. Don't push her in, please," Amelia whimpered, her eyes half open but unseeing. Abigail, kneeling beside the bed, squeezed her sister's hand tightly, whispering rapidly in their own tongue, as if to calm her. Amelia continued in English, her small voice pleading. "We won't tell. Just let her go. Mama, Mama." Prudence's blood ran cold. Mama. The twins had never known their birth mother, never even called Prudence Mama, preferring to use mother when they addressed her at all. Prudence gently shook Amelia, trying to wake her from the nightmare. The girl fell silent, only to startle everyone by suddenly screaming a single phrase. "He did it! He did it!" Her voice broke on a sob, and then Amelia went limp, collapsing back onto the pillows as unconsciousness overtook her once more. Abigail began to cry softly, rocking back and forth on the floor next to the bed, clutching the ribbon to her chest. The commotion brought Reverend Harper and Dr. Morton rushing into the room. Prudence, her face white as a sheet, explained what she had heard. The adults were baffled and shaken. Who was Amelia accusing in her fevered state? What vision of a river and someone being pushed was tormenting her? Over the next day, as Amelia remained bedridden and insensate, Abigail grew increasingly agitated. She refused to eat or sleep, hovering near her twin, flinching at every moan or murmur Amelia made. Then, on the second night, Abigail suddenly rose and walked out of the house without a word. Panic-stricken, Samuel and Prudence and the doctor scrambled to follow her. The girl moved as though in a trance, barefoot in her nightdress, out of the parsonage and down the moonlit road. She led them through the center of town, past the shuttered shops and silent houses, all the way to the far end, where the old stone bridge crossed Blackwater River. It was an eerie sight, the pale child standing on the moonlit bridge, staring down at the dark, swift current below. Dr. Morton reached her first and gently touched her shoulder. "Abby, why have you come here?" he asked softly. Abigail didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on a point along the riverbank. "There," she said in a hollow whisper, pointing to a clump of reeds at the water's edge. Samuel Harper lifted his lantern and approached the spot with trepidation, the doctor right behind him. At first they saw nothing unusual. Then Prudence gasped, raising a hand to her mouth. Half hidden in the reeds was a length of tattered fabric, a faded calico dress. Tangled in it, gleaming faintly in the lantern light, was a buckle from a lady's shoe. Memories of a decade-old mystery flooded back to Reverend Harper as he recognized that fabric. It looked very much like the dress the unknown young woman had been wearing the night he found the twins on the church steps. Until this moment, everyone had assumed the twins' birth mother had vanished into the night, abandoning her babies. A search at the time had turned up nothing. Now, the truth glistened in the muddy riverbank. The woman hadn't left Blue Hollow alive. Overwhelmed by the realization, Samuel and Prudence began carefully pulling away the weeds and mud. Within minutes, their worst fears were confirmed. There, in a shallow grave revealed by recent floods, lay the skeletal remains of a woman clutching a rotting piece of paper. When Dr. Morton delicately retrieved the paper from the bony fingers, he found it was a water-damaged letter. Enough of the ink had survived to identify who had written it. It was signed by Ezekiel Pritchard, the grocer, Eleanor Pritchard's husband. The letter, once deciphered, told a harrowing tale. Ezekiel Pritchard had been involved in an illicit affair with a young woman who worked at the town inn, a woman who became pregnant with his child. Terrified that his reputation and marriage would be ruined, Ezekiel had plotted to do away with her. The letter was a half-written confession, never sent, in which he admitted to luring the woman to the bridge the night of April 5th, 1862, giving her a packet of what he claimed were money and medicine, then pushing her into the raging spring river to drown. Unbeknownst to him, the woman had already given birth prematurely to twin girls. She had left the infants at the church just minutes before meeting her lover, hoping they would be found and cared for. The letter ended with Ezekiel expressing deep remorse and fear of divine punishment, but it seemed he never finished or sent it. Reverend Harper reeled as the pieces fell into place. The twins' mother had been murdered, and not by some unknown drifter, but by a respected member of their own community. Ezekiel Pritchard had continued on with his life all these years as an upstanding grocer, even as his victims' children grew up in the very town where he had killed their mother. And the tragedies that had plagued Blue Hollow, the Pritchards poisoned? Could it be that Eleanor's mysterious death by arsenic was Ezekiel's long-delayed comeuppance, orchestrated by some unseen justice? Had the twins been unconsciously dispensing vengeance through their predictions? It sounded outrageous. And yet, here was proof of a hidden crime connecting many of the dots. Dr. Morton's mind churned. The twins had fixated on Eleanor Pritchard before her death, sewing her name to a doll. They rang a bell to save the Bradleys, who were close friends of the Pritchards, now revealed to have harbored a killer. Their fevered utterances about someone being pushed in the river, it all pointed to this secret. Samuel Harper was a man of faith, but even he had to wonder if some divine hand, perhaps the spirit of the twins' murdered mother, had been guiding her daughters to expose the truth. Abigail, still standing on the bridge with eyes locked on that dark patch of riverbank, finally exhaled a long sigh. She turned to her father, shivering now in the cold night, and simply said, "It's done." Then she collapsed into Reverend Harper's arms, as exhausted as if she had been the one to dig up the grave herself. He carried his daughter home in stunned silence. What followed was a blur. Ezekiel Pritchard, confronted with the evidence of his letter and the remains by the river, broke down and confessed in full. Overcome with guilt and the recent death of his wife, whom he tearfully insisted he never meant to harm, Ezekiel admitted that he had indeed murdered the twins' mother that night in 1862. In fact, he had seen the babies on the church steps when he went to meet their mother, and after disposing of her, he had nearly returned to snatch the infants and throw them in the river as well, to erase all traces of his sin. But the sight of lantern light at the parsonage frightened him off, and he fled, leaving the girls to be found by the Reverend. The town was aghast. The monstrous act by one of their own had brought a curse upon Blue Hollow, many said, and now that curse had been revealed by the very children who narrowly escaped being its victims. News traveled fast. It was only a matter of time before a U.S. Marshal arrived to take Ezekiel Pritchard into custody to stand trial for murder. But the Harper twins' part in unveiling the crime was kept relatively quiet beyond the town, partly out of a desire by Reverend Harper to protect his daughters, and partly because the official report chalked the discovery up to anonymous tips and the lucky happenstance of spring floods. Within Blue Hollow, however, there was no more denying that Abigail and Amelia's secret language and uncanny knowledge had not been evil after all. It had been the instrument of justice, or so it seemed to many. Those who had feared and tormented the twins were left to grapple with shame and uncertainty. Miss Hazel Green, who had spread so many malicious rumors, refused to speak publicly of the matter again. Others approached the Harpers with trembling apologies, seeking forgiveness for ever suspecting the girls of malevolence. Yet, even vindicated, the Harper twins remained as enigmatic as ever. Once Amelia recovered from her illness, the girls went back to speaking only to each other, offering no further explanations about how they knew where to find their mother's grave or why they had foreseen the tragedies that befell the town. The community's attitude toward them swung unpredictably between gratitude and lingering fear. Some saw them now as avenging angels, others still as uncanny beings not quite of this world. The duality had simply flipped. Before the Pritchard revelation, people whispered that the twins were harbingers of evil. After, some whispered that perhaps they were instruments of divine retribution. In either case, Abigail and Amelia were never again going to be treated as ordinary children. Realizing that Blue Hollow would never truly be a safe or normal home for their daughters, Reverend Samuel Harper made the painful decision to leave the town that summer of 1872. With the help of Dr. Morton, who had contacts in St. Louis, he secured a position at a church in a distant part of Missouri under a different name, giving an excuse to his congregation that he and Prudence needed a fresh start after all the turmoil. Late one warm June night, the Harpers quietly packed a wagon with their belongings. Prudence gently tied a bonnet under each twin's chin and made sure they each had their favorite doll. The girls seemed to understand what was happening without being told. They moved calmly and silently, side by side, as they climbed into the wagon. Only their eyes roamed the darkened silhouette of Blue Hollow, the church steeple where they had rung the bell, the rooftops of houses where lives had intersected with theirs in strange ways. A few close friends saw them off. Dr. Morton shook Samuel's hand firmly. "You're doing the right thing," the doctor said, pressing a small journal into Samuel's palm. It was a parting gift, notes he had compiled on the twins' unique condition and suggestions for any doctor who might treat them in the future, though he admitted any physician would likely be as mystified as he had been. The twins each gave the kindly doctor an unexpected hug, one of the few moments of direct affection they'd ever shown to someone outside their immediate family. Then, as the wagon rolled away under the moonlight, the Harper twins peered back one last time. Abigail could just be seen raising her hand, not quite a wave, perhaps a gesture of goodbye to the only home they had known. Amelia, beside her, clutched the frayed white ribbon in her hands, her face unreadable. Just when the people of Blue Hollow thought they'd seen everything, the story of the Harper twins delivered one more chilling surprise. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content, and don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Now, let's discover what final eerie discovery kept Blue Hollow shivering long after the twins were gone. A week after the family's departure, Miss Hazel Green went to ring the church bell for Sunday service, only to find a small bundle left on the front pew. Inside it were 2 porcelain doll heads, the faces painted to look exactly like Abigail and Amelia, complete with tiny blue eyes and little red painted lips. Around the neck of each doll was tied a strip of white ribbon. Whether this was some kind of final message from the twins or a cruel prank by someone in town was never determined, but it sent a chill through all who saw it. In the years that followed, Blue Hollow slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Ezekiel Pritchard was tried and executed for murder. The tragedies that had once plagued the town seemed to cease after he was gone, and the twins had left. The story of the orphan girls with the secret language faded into a local legend that old-timers would recount in lowered voices, often embellishing it with each retelling. Some claimed the twins could speak to ghosts or were witches who broke a curse by unmasking a killer. Others insisted they were simply extraordinarily perceptive children who noticed things no one else did and communicated it in the only way they knew how. As for Abigail and Amelia Harper, their trail after leaving Blue Hollow grows cold. Church records from 1873 in a town near St. Louis mention a Reverend Stephen Harper, an alias Samuel used, whose 2 adopted daughters were sent to a convent school for a time. A letter from a nun in 1874 described the twins as quiet, well-behaved, but inseparable to the point of isolation. They speak to others only when necessary. Their own tongue they still use between themselves, though it grows less frequent. This suggests that separated from the environment of fear and suspicion, the twins' use of their private language diminished as they grew older. There is also mention in medical journals of the late 19th century of a pair of twins exhibiting what we now call cryptophasia, or twin speech, who were studied briefly by a physician in Chicago. Some speculate those were Abigail and Amelia under different names, but this has never been confirmed. Modern science offers some explanations for the Harper twins' strange abilities. Cryptophasia is a known phenomenon where twins, especially if isolated, develop a unique language that only they understand. It often includes imitated sounds and combined fragments of real languages and babble. In most cases, it's harmless and fades as the twins integrate into society. Some researchers also suggest that twins can exhibit an unusually strong empathetic bond. They may pick up on subtle cues or emotions from each other and those around them, giving the impression of shared intuition. Perhaps Abigail and Amelia were simply exceptionally observant and attuned to patterns, noticing a slight unsteadiness in Thomas Wilcox's gait that signaled an oncoming stroke, hearing a faint splash that others missed when Timothy fell into the barrel, smelling smoke on the wind before anyone else, or sensing the guilt radiating from Ezekiel Pritchard whenever they passed him. Over time, these small perceptions might have added up to what seemed like supernatural foresight. Yet, even with such theories, many aspects of their story remain unexplained. How did 2 10-year-old girls, with no knowledge of their true parentage, lead their family to the exact hidden grave of their mother and the confession of her murderer? Coincidence? Divine intervention? The twins themselves never provided answers in any recorded account. They slipped into history's shadows as quietly and as mysteriously as they entered Blue Hollow all those years ago. The twins who spoke a language of death, as they would later be called in dime novels and whispered legends, leave us with a haunting reminder. Sometimes the scariest mysteries are not ghosts or monsters, but the untamed possibilities of the human mind and soul. In a world eager to label the unusual as either miracle or curse, Abigail and Amelia Harper showed that reality can blur those lines. Their tale challenges us to consider that perhaps some secrets, whether spoken in an unknown tongue or written in the silent bond between sisters, are meant to remain hidden, their truth known only to those who share the unbreakable connection of blood, history, and something deeper that we may never fully understand. What do you think of this eerie story? Do you believe every event happened exactly as the frightened townspeople described, or might some details have been exaggerated over time? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and whether you've ever heard of similar tales of twins or strange predictions. If this story gave you chills, please share it with a friend who loves dark historical mysteries. Don't forget to hit the like button to support our content, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a tale that blurs the line between fact and folklore. Remember, sometimes the truth, hiding behind the veil of legend, is more disturbing than any fiction, and it might be closer to home than you think.